Okay, there we are. We're live. Okay, welcome everybody. We are back together here again for another episode of Phantastes, but we've decided to take a bit of a detour and look at George MacDonald's imagination essay. So I'm going to post a link. Let me see if I know how to do this. Yes, I can copy, right? Copy and paste. Okay. I'm going to post a link in the chat here. And if anybody wants to join us on this discussion, you're more than welcome to, because we're going to discuss, we're going to read and discuss whatever we get out of this. And I just have to preface everything with, I'm not a scholar. I am not a scholar. So yeah, we're just fumbling around here, but we're having fun doing it, and that's all that counts, in my opinion. Okay, so glasses. I'll start.
I didn't read very much last time. If you do want me to start.
Oh yeah, okay, go for it. Yeah, you want to start with the first? Yeah, just start with the thing.
I'll start until I stumble.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right. So, The Imagination, Its Function, and Its Culture by George MacDonald, first published in 1867 in A Dish of Orts. Whether that was a...
I'm going to look that up while you're reading.
Yeah. There are those in whose notion education would seem to consist in the production of a certain repose through the development of this or that faculty, in the depression, if not eradication, of this or that other faculty. But if mere repose were the end in view, an unsparing depression of all the faculties would be the surest means of approaching it, provided always the animal instincts could be depressed likewise, or better still, kept in a state of constant repletion. Happily, however, for the human race, a possession in the passion of hunger, even a more immediate savior. What am I saying? A more immediate savior than the wisest selection of treatment of its faculties. For repose is not the end of education; its end is a noble unrest, and even an ever renewing awakening from the dead. A ceaseless questioning of the past for the interpretation of the future, an urging on the motions of life, which had better far be accelerated into fever than retarded into lethargy.
So, okay, is there anything here you guys want to talk about? There's a lot in the first paragraph.
Yeah.
I have the last sentence, which is the long sentence, of course, highlighted, that repose is not the end of education, but its end is a noble unrest, an ever renewed awakening from the dead, a ceaseless questioning of the past, interpretation of the future. It's kind of like it's not a stasis, like there's always a further up and further in, or something like that.
Yeah, like the very first line is interesting. He says, there are those in whose notion education would seem to consist in the production of a certain repose through the development of this and that faculty, and the depression, if not eradication, of this and that other faculty. I mean, this is written in 1867, and it doesn't sound very much different than today.
No.
It seems like it. He's very critical of educators who are trying to indoctrinate, essentially, somebody, right? So that they're not really, because that last sentence, for repose is not the end of education, right? Its end is a noble unrest.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, you never get there.
I think there's like this fallacy within our understanding of what knowledge is. That knowledge will come to a conclusive like state of rest. Like if we do not form a conclusion, then we do not have any sort of viable knowledge to work with, you know, or something of that. So if it's a closure, it's like a closure of all possibilities beyond, you know, this finite set of conclusive knowledge we've come to.
Yeah, it's like, okay, now you've reached your destination, right? You studied history, now you're a historian. Go do the history. Go do what I taught you. But it, you know, there doesn't seem to be any other there. I like the way he puts it, the noble unrest, right? Its end is a noble unrest. Like you should just be yearning to know more, because there's always more to know, you know?
Yeah.
So,
what's weird is that he uses the word depression to sort of counter that. So like you'd think, oftentimes you'd think of like, okay, well, the relief of depression would be, you know, a state of rest or something like that. But that's not the case. Like, you know.
Well, depression is a state of rest in a sense.
Yeah.
Like it's a nothingness. It's an absolute nothingness.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's continue.
Okay. By those who consider a balanced repose the end of culture, the imagination must necessarily be regarded as one faculty before all others to be suppressed. Are those not facts, they say? Why forsake them for fancies? Is there not that which may be known? Why forsake it for inventions? What God hath made, into that let man inquire. We answer, to inquire into what God has made is the main function of the imagination. It is aroused by facts, is nourished by facts, seeks for higher and yet higher laws in those facts, but refuses to regard science as the sole interpreter of nature, or the laws of science as the only region of discovery.
Wow, that sounds pretty contemporary, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Yeah.
I just want to take the chance. Now, there's a few people watching. If anybody wants to join us in this, we're just reading through the imagination essay, and you're more than welcome to join in. We'd love it.
Yeah, please. Yeah, right here, I feel like what he's doing too is pitting in. I might be reading into this already because we know George MacDonald, but a faculty of knowing that is. It maybe has vanished from the world or something like that, and has been replaced by like this counterfeit way of knowing. And he says right here, it's the scientific mode of discovery, you know.
Facts.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that he doesn't dismiss facts. Like facts have a function.
Yes.
And they exist for the imagination.
Yeah. I like it. It's kind of like they're a seed for like the womb of the imagination or something. So
Yeah,
it's really cool.
Yeah.
Oh man, there's a lot there I could elaborate on, but keep going.
Okay. Well, feel free. Like, we can take our time with this too.
I'm thinking of facts as being sort of bound to materiality and what we can observe through observation. That was redundant to say, but it is the finite images that we encounter, but these finite images are jump off places. Like, they're not, like you're saying, they're not the place where we form our stasis or our repose. It's like literally they are the vehicle through which now the imagination can take hold of these finite images, and like, the world is your oyster at that point, you know, like whatever. It's like this is the place where we start, not the place where we end. So
yeah, and this gets to what you were inquiring about with saving the appearances.
Yeah.
Okay. This is why they have to be preserved, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
yeah. In
Can you say more about that a little bit?
well,
Explain that idea a little bit
I
more.
was going to, but I know he's going to get into it more. So
Okay.
you
Okay.
know,
All right.
just
All right.
kind of, I'd like George to be able to speak for himself instead of me, preempting.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
So yeah,
Let's keep going. And okay. We must begin with a definition of the word imagination, or rather, some description of the faculty to which we give the name. The word itself means an imagining or a making of likenesses. The imagination is that faculty which gives form to thought, not necessarily uttered form, but form capable of being uttered in shape or in sound or in any mode upon which the senses can lay hold of.
Okay, stop. Okay, because think about this.
No, right?
Like I had to read that. I know this essay pretty good, and I still have trouble understanding that what he's. Okay, so let's see if we can figure this out. The imagination is that faculty which gives form to thought, not necessarily uttered form, but form capable of being uttered in shape or in sound or in any mode upon which the senses can lay hold. So yeah, this is getting to our Merlin Sheldrake conversation too, right? This is the world of the senses. So what I understand this to be is the appearances, or is the things, right? The shapes outside of us, right? And those shapes are rocks and trees and dogs and fires behind Jason and blinds behind Luke and a screen behind me. Like those are the shapes, right? And so the imagination is that I have a weird brain, so you have to put up with me. The imagination is that faculty which gives form to thought, not necessarily uttered form. It's funny how we think that every form of thought is uttered, right?
Yeah, which something to say on that is like
yeah.
half the time I was explaining this earlier, I think in the Boxer, but it was like half of my thoughts, it's like they lose what they were holding in my brain the minute I articulate them. So there's a way in which like something is being sacrificed in the uttering of the thought. So like in the thought, because probably it can't be uttered. It's not an utterable, it's supposed to remain tacit or almost in this unconscious. And it's not even that it's unconscious, but it's just not capable of being captured in language or in a word or in a, and to limit thought to being and the words or bound to language is just that would be an error to begin with.
Yeah, so because George is a writer, my immediate thought is that his imagination is being uttered, right? He's writing it down, and we see it in Phantastes, for example. But if he was a potter, his thought would be being turned out on a potter's wheel. Or if he was a spinner, like me, or if he was a gardener, right? His thoughts would be showing up in his landscaping, right? So that's I think what he's getting at when he says not necessarily uttered form, right? That the imagination, the forms that the imagination creates are not always spoken, but I find it really interesting that seems to be the first thing we think of, is that it's spoken. But think of all the creativity around us that's happening all the time, and it's all coming from the imagination. So yeah.
Is that
I,
those are our thought forms? Thanks. Great.
There's Modus Trollin's imagination.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah, it made me, when you guys were talking, it made me actually think of this verse when Paul is caught up into heaven, into paradise, and he says how he was caught up into paradise and heard inexpressible words, which is not lawful for a man to utter. So it kind of reminded me of that when you were talking about it, Luke. Like
Yeah,
there's
that's
this,
interesting.
there's this,
Inexpressible words which is not lawful for a man to utter?
yeah, that's what my
Wow.
verse says. Yeah, and I don't know if that's, I don't know why I would say not lawful, other than maybe there's something so pure about this realm of thought, or that he was caught up in, to where it's,
well,
he's not able to express it, or it's
the license that we have is our finitude. We don't have more than that, you know. We just have like these. We have these senses, and then we have what we're capable of conveying
Through creativity, and that can be in the form of words, or a statue, or a bridge, or a building, or a cake,
Yeah.
or a glass of
It
wine,
almost kind of
or a taco,
reminds, yeah.
or
And
big
when
money.
you're saying that, when you're talking about different forms of it, like even in art, or even like a sunset or something, it kind of makes me think of almost a little bit about what Paul says here, like where if you were encountering just like the perfect sunset, it would almost be like, you would almost destroy it by talking or something. There's something in those moments where like it just requires, what is necessary is just requires like no utterance, just absolute stillness, and just almost like
Contemplation.
observation. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's still speaking in a weird way.
I
It's just not through utterance.
I can feel the Merlin David Abram conversation seeping in right at this moment.
That's good.
Okay. All right, let's keep going then. Sorry, I keep interrupting, but there's so many good sentences
No.
in this.
Okay. Okay. It is therefore that faculty in man which is the likest to the prime operation of the power of God, and has therefore been called the creative faculty, and its exercise creation. Poet means maker. We must not forget, however, that between creator and poet lies one unpassable gulf which distinguishes, far be it from us to say divides, all that is God's from all that is man's. A gulf teeming with infinite revelations, but a gulf over which no man can pass to find out God, although God need not pass over to it to find man. The gulf between that which calls and that which is thus called into being, between that which makes and its own image and that which is made in that image.
Okay. That just gave me goosebumps.
So the one thing that I want to say right here, and I don't know if this is George MacDonald that said this, but it's this quote that I have, and it's not me who says it, but the playground of the imagination is the particular. So I feel like in this paragraph, he is really going in between like the infinite and the finite, the world of unity and the world of multiplicity, or at least that's what I'm reading, that in between the lines when I'm reading this. But
well, I've read this, like I said, many times, and I totally just now saw something that I never saw before. He talks about this unpassable gulf, which a lot of Christians don't like to hear about, right? Like, because they think there's nothing between me and God, right? I have it, but George seems to indicate that there is a gulf that no man can pass, but God doesn't have to pass over it to find us, right? And that gulf is that which calls and that which is called into being, or that which makes in its own image and that which is made in that image.
Yeah, this is really good.
Yeah, it is. And the only thing that I can think of that would, perhaps come close to giving you a feel for it, it would be a parent and a child. Right? Like there's a gulf between that child and you, right? But it's only a gulf that the child can't pass over, not one that you can you there's no gulf between you and the child.
Mm.
We call it a generation gap. We do. You know, the children hate the dad jokes, right? They're like, "Oh, whatever." They don't get it. But the dad never has problems understanding their humor. Like there seems to be a gulf, right? Where the thing that calls, how does he put it? Between that which calls and that which is called into being, or between that which makes in its own image and that which is made in that image.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's just leave it at that.
There's
Because
there's one part where he says one unpassable gulf that distinguishes, far be it from us to say divides.
Yeah.
And I really like that part where he says it doesn't necessarily divide, it just distinguishes. No. And I feel like what's so important about this is that it's almost important that gulf remain, because otherwise, if the gulf is taken away, then you have reached this form of repose. Like you kind of always want this gulf that's always it's always calling you into being. Like you want it to always be. But it's like you're never divided from it. I guess I really like that he says that it's not that you're separated from what's calling you. It's just you're distinguished from it or something. But it's always calling you further and further and further into being and further into its own image or something like that.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good. This is the beauty of two heads are better than one. Three heads are better than one.
George McDonald.
That idea too. It's like I wonder if like this, and this might be a far-fetched thought, but like for me, this is clearly an image that I have in my head is the idea that like the angels envy this capacity that humans have, but what is it that humans have that the angels envy? Are you guys tracking with what I'm saying in this?
I think so.
I guess what I'm trying to say is like I've had a hard time identifying what that would be, because it's like they have this access to the infinite that I would be, seemingly envious of. But in this particular scenario, it's like, no, like through the right lens, like you have this finitude that exposes you to what is a multiplicity that is infinite. I mean, what does he say there?
Yeah, infinite revelation. A gulf teeming with infinite revelation.
Like that is not, if you already have that revelation, like there, it's like you don't even have any way of discovering, or do you really need an imagination?
Well, this is what I think this is what Jason was getting at with the repose, right? Like then you've reached that there's that you're no longer having that noble unrest that he talked about in the beginning there.
Yeah.
Of seeking. Yeah.
We're saying the same things.
In different ways, and that's how it is. That's the way it goes, folks.
It really is.
And it's beautiful.
Okay. Should we keep going, or does you guys want to say anything else there?
No, we won't get very far, because this paragraph is jam-packed.
It is better to keep the word creation for that calling out of nothing, which is the imagination of God, except it be as an occasional symbolic expression. Those daring whose daring is fully recognized of the likeness of man's work and the work of his maker. And of the likeness of man's work to the work of his maker. Sorry. The necessary unlikeness between the creator and the created holds within the equally necessary likeness of the thing made to him who makes it. And so the work of the made to the work of the maker. When, therefore, refusing to employ the word creation, okay, sorry, I'm stumbling here.
It's okay.
When, therefore, refusing to employ the word creation to the work of man, yet we use the word imagination of the work of God, we cannot be said to dare at all. It is of the work of man, yet we use the word imagination of the work of God. We cannot be said, okay. It is only to give the name of man's faculty to that power after which and by which it was fashioned. The imagination of man is made in the image of the imagination of God. Everything of man must have been made of God first, and it will help much towards our understanding of the imagination and its function in man if we first succeed in regarding aright the imagination of God, in which the imagination of man lives and moves and has its being.
I know. I don't know what to say. I don't have any
Isn't that
comment.
exciting? I find
Yeah.
that so exciting.
Yeah.
I find that so exciting. Personally.
Yeah. Okay. I'll keep going.
Oh, hang on. I just wanted to reread this one sentence here.
Yeah, I kind of stumbled there for a bit.
The necessary unlikeness between the creator and the created holds within it the equally necessary likeness of the thing made to him who makes it. The necessary unlikeness holds within it the equally necessary likeness of the thing made. Okay. Yeah, the image of God. And so of the work of the made to the work of the maker. So the creative capacity of man is the image of God, I think is what he's getting at here.
Wow.
When therefore refusing to employ the word creation of the work of man, we yet use the word imagination of the work of God. Because he says he wants to use the word create. Where is that? Sorry, I'm stumbling and my screen got dark. It is better to keep the word creation for that calling out of nothing, which is the imagination of God. So that's what he's getting at here when he says, when therefore refusing to employ the word creation of the work of man, we yet use the word imagination of the work of God, we cannot be said to dare at all. I'm not sure what that sentence means. Do you get it?
I was going to ask you.
So is he saying, if anybody's listening, you can maybe help us out. Is he saying that it's not a dare to use the word imagination when talking about the works of God? I think that's what he's getting at. It's not, we cannot be said to dare at all. So it's not, yeah, I think that's what he's saying. It is only to give the name of man's faculty to that power after which and by which it was fashioned. The imagination of man is made in the image of the imagination of God. Okay, so then he substantiates that previous sentence by showing us that our imagination is made in the image of the imagination of God. Everything of man must have been of God first, and it will help much toward our understanding of the imagination and its functions in man if we first succeed in regarding aright the imagination of God, in which the imagination of man lives and moves and has its being. Okay.
It just,
yeah, it almost seems like he's just like really, really strengthening the bones of imagination or something. I don't know, but because it's just like I was reading the first part where he says the word itself means an imaging or a making of likenesses, and then he goes on to talk about the infinite revelations. So within the imagination is this infinite likenesses that we're gazing at, that are all come from the creation of God.
Mm-hmm.
And so everything we imagine is from God's creation in a way, and so our imagination is, in a sense, from the imagination of God, or something like that.
Well, it's God's imagination in which our imagination lives and moves and has its being.
Yeah, I don't know how to say it better.
That is
Yeah.
creation. That is creation, honestly, right? Like,
Yeah.
because God's imagination is made manifest in creation, in everything that He created, and that is where we live and move and have our being, within His imagination. Because He's going to get it. I can say that confidently, I think, because He's going to get into this even more. So
I kind of want to share like an anecdote
yeah,
really quickly, because like this, and you'll have to tell me if this is far-fetched, but I was in this group of Christians where we were doing this thing where we call it canvases, and where you'd open up your mind for the Holy Spirit to paint images on it, like a canvas, like you're so me not ever coming from a more like Pentecostal upbringing, but I was surrounded with people who were accustomed to this. I'm like, okay, how does this work? I'm trying to like figure out exactly how this works, but they go around the circle and people are getting these visions that correspond to other people in the room because they're, fixating on somebody who's sitting beside them, and then they're coming up with this vision that speaks to them personally in their life. But like, hey, are you getting anything from this? Are you getting anything? And then people are crying. And anyways, it's this whole thing. And it's basically like this, like almost like this prophetic vision, and then the reading of that vision. And anyways, they get around to me and I'm like, I don't know what's going on. And they're like, okay, well, just think about the person beside you. Just think about that person. And it's like, okay. And then what is the Holy Spirit telling you? And it's like, okay, I'm not used to this language, right? But
yeah.
I come up with a story. Like, I felt like I was kind of caught in a corner, but like,
Yeah.
I just allowed myself to like use my creative faculty, my imagination, to come up with a story like I've done my whole life. When I started writing, I could start to write fantasy stories and fictional stories, but like I just used that same capacity that I had when I started to create stories in my mind for this, in this moment with this girl. And I give the picture, the image that's coming up in my head. And like, by the time I'm done explaining this vision that I have in my mind, even though it feels like I've conjured it, I'm using like my own imaginal capacity to come up with this. She's crying, and she's telling me that like God just spoke through me to her. And I'm just like, I just made this shit up. You know what I'm saying?
I love your face.
I don't know. Like, but at the same time, it's like, but then it's like, what do you do? Like, somebody tells you that God just spoke through you. Do you did not? Like, far be it from me to say that God didn't like use all these.
The donkey. Speak through the donkey's mouth, sort of thing. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, or like I'm expecting this to come out of left field, not from some intrinsic place of like, I'm actually I'm couched within God's imagination. I'm not operating outside of God's imagination when I'm using my own. Like, does that make sense? Or am I conflating something that shouldn't be?
Well, I honestly, I don't know if I could definitively answer that question, but George MacDonald talks about in his Fantastic Imagination essay, he talks about how I think I read that to you guys about people deriving meaning from his stories, and they were worried about, well, what if I don't get what you're trying to say, essentially, right? What if I'm not getting the meaning out of the story that you're trying to convey? And he said that doesn't matter. Maybe your meaning is superior to mine, right? And so in that sense, that's what you were doing, right? You were telling a story, and she derived meaning from that, and it doesn't matter if it was the meaning that you intended.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you were trying to, actively deceive this person, well, then I would say that was certainly not the work of the Holy Spirit.
No, but I kind of felt like what I was giving was kind of just like a fortune cookie. Like,
Yeah,
it could have applied to anybody.
Well, it probably was then. If I'm honest. I'm brutally honest sometimes.
No. And so that in that case, it's not like like if you're using your imagination, what's the difference between using your imagination and receiving a revelation? And this is kind of like,
well, he's gonna get into it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's keep going.
It's hard. And I think instances like that, they're even more difficult to parse out, like especially in retrospect, right?
Yeah.
Like there's something like that happening right now, essentially in that revival. I can't remember, Asbury in Kentucky.
Okay.
There's a revival going on, and not to diminish it by any means, but there is a let me see here. If I say, I want to be really generous. I'm trying to be really generous here, okay? Because I don't think that I have any kind of insider information to say whether or not this is real or not real, or like that's actually of no concern to me whatsoever. But there is this moving together thing that living creatures do, and I've been thinking about this recently, so it's right on the top of my mind actually. Starlings are a really good example of this, right? They form these formations. They call them murmurations, and they flock together in these huge flocks, and they just fly. And I mean, you must have seen pictures of them. I've been staring at them on YouTube for like the last week and a half because they're so amazing. This one guy, he was videoing the starlings, and they were over a lake or like a body of water. And you could hear other people's cameras going in the background. And one guy said all of a sudden, "Did you see that? That was a bird." And then the guy went back and he froze that frame, and it was a perfect bird flying over the water. But it was a whole flock of starlings in that shape, wow. Right? And I think we're fascinated by it because it's some kind of group consciousness that is happening there, right? Where these birds are just moving together. And actually, Raj talked about it. I can't remember in whose conversation it was that I watched that he did with somebody. But he said that, I can't remember the name of the group that you get called into in Sikhi. Something like the Kalika or something. Do you remember? Anyway.
Sounds right, but I don't know.
The idea is that when you become a part of this group, you move together. And I remember hearing that and thinking of the starlings. I'm like, that's like the starlings. Like, it's like a shared consciousness, you know? So now I forget why I'm even talking about it.
I think because we were talking about, maybe you were tying it into Luke's prophetic.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
You brought up the revival.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's right. And so I think in situations like that where people are together and they're involved in something, like there is a shared consciousness happening, and the giver and the receiver are all a part of it, right? In a way that I don't think we understand. So
That's good.
Yeah, that is interesting. For good or for ill. I mean,
absolutely.
all right.
Yeah.
The imagination of man is made in the image of the imagination of God. Everything of man must have been of God first, and it will help much towards our understanding of the imagination and its function in man if we succeed in regarding aright the imagination of God, in which the imagination of man lives and moves and has its being. Sorry. As to what thought is in the mind of God ere it takes form, or what the form is to him ere he utters it, in a word, what the consciousness of God is in either case, all we can say is that our consciousness in the resembling conditions must, afar off, resemble his. But when we continue to consider the acts embodying the divine thought, if indeed thought and act be not with him one and the same, then we enter a region of large difference.
Okay, I just want to stop there and talk about the brackets, because this is interesting. I think this is kind of what Aquinas gets at with his actus purus, pure act. God is pure act, right? So I think George is conceding to that. Like he's saying, if indeed thought and act be not one with him, one and the same. So God doesn't think and then act.
Yeah.
And that I think it's important to just stress that, because he's gonna riff off of that idea here.
Okay. We discover at once, for instance, that where a man would make a machine or a picture or a book, God makes man that makes the book or the picture or the machine. Would God give us a drama? He makes a Shakespeare. Or would he construct a drama more immediately his own? He begins with the building of a stage itself, and the stage is a world, a universe of worlds. He makes the actors, and they do not act. They are their part. He utters them into the visible to work out their life, his drama. When he would have an epic, he sends a thinking hero into his drama, and the epic is a soliloquy of his Hamlet. Instead of writing his lyrics, he sets his birds and his maidens a singing. All the processes of the ages are God's science. All the flow of history is his poetry. His sculpture is not in marble, but in living and speech giving forms, which pass away, not to yield place to those that come after, but to be perfected in a nobler studio. What he has done remains, although it vanishes, and he never forgets what he has once done, or it does not even,
or does it?
Or does it even once? As the thoughts move in the mind of man, so move the words of men and women in the mind of God. And make no confusion there, for there they had their birth, the offspring of his imagination. Man is but a thought of God.
As the thoughts move in the mind of a man, so move the worlds of men and women in the mind of God. You got any thoughts, Jason?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. This is intense stuff. I like the part where he was talking about, instead of writing his lyrics, he sets his birds, his maidens a singing. All the processes of the ages are God's science. All the flow of history is his poetry. His sculpture is not in marble, but in living and speech-giving forms, which pass away, not to yield place to those that come after, but to be perfected in a nobler studio. And that reminds me of Phantastes, that last sentence. But I don't know that we've gotten there yet in the book, in the reading. But I mean, I don't know how to. how to expound on it too much. It just reminded me of the scene where he finds the lady in Alabaster, the white lady, and he sings to her. He tries to kiss her because he thinks what could awake her, but eventually he ends up singing to her, and it's in his song or something that she wakes up and and becomes more. And then the whole time it's like he's chasing her, and she's just kind of growing into more and more of a woman the whole time he's after her, or something like that. I don't know. I don't know what to do with it. It just that's what it came to my mind. But
well, that's interesting because, like I said, when you read this the unspoken sermons, you start to see the theology in the stories, right? And when you read this essay, you start to see how he used some of his own what do you call them, propositions about the imagination, and how it functions within the story itself, like in a very practical way, like what you said with the woman in the alabaster, for example. Yeah, and I find when I was reading Lilith and Phantastes both, I could hear some of the unspoken sermons being preached, and I could hear some of this essay in the back of my mind, So
yeah.
Okay, so according to George, man is but a thought of God.
Yeah, what a statement.
Well, because he said at the beginning there that if indeed thought and act be not with him one and the same, right? So to create is to think. It's the same thing.
Yeah, I feel like this does go back to that, like it's not static either. Like it certainly has an origin, but it's in a process of becoming.
Yeah, because God actually makes a person, right? Like he doesn't make a thing, he makes a person. And that person's life has to unfold, and that person is connected to everything else, right? Because that's what person making is about. It's about being in relationship. So, yeah, it's a huge interconnected web in a sense.
Yeah.
And
yeah, it's almost like he gives the creation its integrity.
Yeah.
And then in that integrity is maintained, but it's evolving. Despite, I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course.
There's
Hi, Chad.
It's also reminded me, and this is the next chapter we're getting into in Phantastes, but I'll just share this one sentence. Because when George was talking about he doesn't write a drama, he creates like a Shakespeare. He creates a person that's going to basically be the story, or live the story, or write the story. But then this says, I sat a long time unwilling to go, but my unfinished story urged me on. I must act and I must wander. And it made me think of that when you said act and thought are the same thing. And just like simple fact of like, he sat a long time unwilling to go, but my unfinished story urged me on. So there's not a repose there. And it's just, and the simple, just the wandering and just the acting
is this in Phantastes, Jason?
Yeah.
Okay. Wow, that's a great example of this essay coming to life in the story, right? That's a really great example. That's really good.
Yeah. Good job, Jason.
Okay.
It's not like I wrote it.
No, but you remembered it.
Yeah, you're recalling Phantastes in the same way that you can, like, in weaving it into the conversation in the same way that you do so with scripture, which is just, I love it.
It's his gift. Yeah.
Thanks. Well, thanks, guys.
Okay, I'm going to read a little bit. For what are the forms? Oh, no, wait. Is that where we are? No. If we now consider the so-called creative faculty in man, this is what I read last time. If we now consider the so-called creative faculty in man, we shall find that in no primary sense is this faculty creative. Indeed, a man is rather being thought than thinking. When a new thought arises in his mind, he knew it not till he found it there. Therefore, he could not even have sent for it. He did not create it, else how could it be the surprise that it was when it arose? And I mean, we've all had that experience, right? He may indeed, in rare instances, foresee that something is coming and make ready the place for its birth, but that is the utmost relation of consciousness and will he can bear to the dawning idea. Leaving this aside, however, and turning to the embodiment or revelation of thought, we shall find that a man no more creates the forms by which he would reveal his thoughts than he creates those thoughts themselves. Now he's getting deep into this idea of figuration and forms and appearances. So just keep Barfield in mind as we go down into, and I think I said this last time too, but I really feel like this is where Barfield got, at least the fountain from where, his idea sprung.
Okay.
For what are the forms by means of which a man may reveal his thoughts? Are they not those of nature? But although he is created in the closest sympathy with these forms, yet even these forms are not born in his mind. What springs there is the perception that this or that form is already an expression of this or that phase of thought or of feeling. For the world around him is an outward figuration of the condition of his mind, an inexhaustible storehouse of forms, whence he may choose exponents, the crystal pictures that shall protect his thought and not need to be broken that the light may break forth. The meanings are in those forms already, else they could be no garment of unveiling. God has made the world that it should thus serve his creature, developing in the service that imagination whose necessity it meets. The man has but to light the lamp within the form. His imagination is the light. It is not the form. And that's really important. So the way I understand this, and if you guys have anything to add, it'd be great, is that God made God made the forms. He made creation, right? And they are the means by which we reveal our thoughts, and he's going to get into it further down here. What springs there is the perception that this or that form is already an expression of this or that phase of thought or of feeling. For the world around him is an outward figuration of the condition of his mind. So, like all of creation is talking to you about your microcosm, what's going on inside of you, right? And the imagination is not the forms, but it's the thing that lights up the forms, right? It's the lamp within the form. Light the lamp within the form. So I'm so bad at this. Like I said, I'm not a propositional thinker. My reflexive thing would be to tell a story that would illustrate this, Have you got any thoughts, Jason?
So I'm not really sure. It would probably be maybe along the lines of another story as well. And I'm not. I want to make sure I'm tracking with rightly about the thought. The thought is the light that kind of casts the form, or something like that. It just reminded me of when, and this is how you actually sent me this essay, Imagination Essays, because I asked you if you had read this book, The Golden Key by George MacDonald.
Mhm.
And I think when you sent me this essay, it was titled "The Golden Key" or something like that, and it was about the imagination. But what came to my mind when you're talking about the forms is there's this part, and it's not. I don't think it'll spoil the short story or anything. But there's this part where they meet this woman, and she says, it's these two characters. They're going together on a journey. And she says, if you should lose each other, and you go through the, I can never remember the name of that country. Do not be afraid, but go on and on. And so eventually they come to this. It's basically this big valley, and all they can see before them, they're so entranced because all they see are all these shadows, these like forms, and these shadows are falling before them, and the shadows are kind of like not necessarily on the ground, but they're in the air and they're higher, and they see like all these beautiful shadows, and all they can say is, "We just want to go to the land from where these shadows come." And so they're walking through something like the Valley of the Shadow of Death. That's what I guess, and it's kind of like this life, like
it kind of reminds me of the caves in Plato's cave, right? Where they see the shadows, but they don't see the actual things that are making the shadows. They want to go see the things that are making the shadows.
Yeah. So this, and that's kind of, I kind of imagine that's what this world is too. Like all the forms we inhabit, they're almost like types and shadows of the truer thought or light that we're trying to get to, or something like that. But I don't know. That was the thing that came to my mind. But I was trying to find the part where they're actually walking through the land, but I don't know if I'll find it. Oh, here it is. But I don't know how long it would take to read through. But because he talks about form and stuff like that. After a while, they reached more open spaces. Shadows flitted, and there were half bird like, half human would float across on an outspread sailing pinions. And then a group of gambling children would follow by the loveliest female form, and that again, like a stride of a titanic shape. Like just all these forms keep appearing before them, and they want to go to place from where we must find the country from which these shadows come, said Mossy. So that's what they just are longing for. So that's, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how related that is, but that's kind of what came to my mind when you were talking about that with the different forms.
Yeah.
I don't know. So that's all I got. Sorry.
Okay, well, he gives an illustration further down here. He says, in illustration of what we mean, take a passage from the poet Shelley. In his poem Adonis, written upon the death of Keats, representing death as the revealer of secrets, he says, the one remains, the many change and pass. Heaven's light forever shines, earth's shadows fly. Life, like a dome of many-colored glass, stains the white radiance of eternity until death tramples it to fragments. This is a new embodiment, certainly, whence he who gains not, for the moment at least, a loftier feeling of death must be dull either of heart or of understanding. But has Shelley created this figure, or only put together its parts according to the harmony of truths already embodied in each of the parts? So this is where he's going to show his thesis to be, to have some substance to it. For first he takes the inventions of his fellow men in glass, in color, in dome. With these he represents life as finite though elevated, and as an analysis although a lovely one. Next, he presents eternity as the dome of the sky above this dome of colored glass, the sky having ever been regarded as the true symbol of eternity. This portion of the figure he enriches by the attribution of whiteness or unity and radiance. And last, he shows us death as the destroying revealer, walking aloft through the upper region, treading out this life bubble of colors, that the man may look beyond it and behold the true, the uncolored, the all-colored. So he's just demonstrating there how Shelley takes the forms that already exist and he shines a light on them with his imagination. Right? So he hasn't really created anything. He never created the forms. The forms exist to, how does he put it? The means by which a man may reveal his thought. Right? That's what George MacDonald is saying here. Because in the paragraph above, he says, leaving this aside, however, and turning to the embodiment of revelation, of thought, we shall find that a man no more creates the forms by which he would reveal his thoughts than he creates those thoughts themselves. For what are the forms by means of which a man may reveal his thoughts? Are they not those of nature? What springs there is the perception from this or that form is already an expression of this or that phase of thought or of feeling, for the world around him is an outward figuration of the condition of his mind, an inexhaustible storehouse of forms from which he may choose exponents. The meanings are in the forms already. Otherwise, they could be no garment of unveiling. So now does that make more sense after reading the Shelley poem? No?
I
Well,
cannot say that I've penetrated this or
oh,
understand
no.
like what he's
It's
written.
huge. Yeah. Yeah. It's a lot. It's a lot. It's, believe me, I've been reading it for a long time and I'm still learning from it.
So I have a question. He has that. So I get the impression, and I could be wrong on this, that George MacDonald has a little bit of an issue with the poem, but he's trying to steelman it. Is that correct or no?
No.
Okay, no.
What he's showing with the poem is that Shelley takes already existing forms, and those forms are the inventions of men in glass, in color, in dome. Okay, those already exist there. They're invented by men. And then he presents the eternity as the dome of the sky above this dome of colored glass. So that's the natural sky, right? So you have this colored glass, which is life, like a dome of many colored glass, stains the white radiance of eternity. So
it's like a rainbow.
There's a dome, which is your life, which is your finitude, right? And it's a many colored glass because that's what our life is. It's many colored. It's many fragments. It's many prisms through which the light shines, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then above that is the natural sky. And what death does is trample it to fragments. So George MacDonald says, he shows us death as the destroying revealer, walking aloft through the upper region, treading out this life bubble of color, that the man may look beyond it and behold the true, the uncolored, the all-colored. Right? Like, because white is all the colors. And it's also white. So it's like no color and all color. And so he doesn't want to explain the poem away, but he wants to show you how Shelley is using the already existing forms he's shining the light of his imagination on the forms. Yes. That's what he's doing.
Yeah, okay? What's coming to my mind, and maybe you could run with this more than I can. Look, I'm not sure I'm really penetrating it or understanding it, but this all colored glass reminds me for some reason of the rainbow and God's throne being encircled by a rainbow. Kind of like the one light in the center is shining through this rainbow or this dome, this colored dome. This all colored is shining out through the other colors of creation or something like that. I don't know if it's right for me to make that association, but
I don't think it's wrong.
Okay.
Actually. But there's not a whole lot in my repertoire that's right or wrong. There are a few things, but not very many. But
Yeah.
that image is used quite a bit in some of the patristic early church fathers too, where they talk about. And it's funny because it's also, I don't know if the glass is colored in Judaism, but there is this shattered vessels and these sparks, right, that are everywhere. There's that image as well. But John Bear talks about he talks about the passion in the early church being celebrated as one thing. So Christ's birth or death and resurrection was celebrated, like literally celebrated on one day. And then it started to get spread out, right? So that you had, one Sunday was this and the next Sunday, and the passion grew. And the way that John Bear explains it is that it became like these many prisms of color through which the light shines, right? And then you get these see, this is where my propositional capabilities really just like nosedive.
Yeah.
I
don't.
Oh, it's
Sorry,
terrible.
go ahead, Luke.
I want to take a stab at what I feel like maybe I'm gleaning from this.
Yeah, do it.
Like it might not be on par, but
well, we're all doing that. We're all taking a stab at this. Okay, so
yeah.
like I said, we're not scholars. Okay, so
I've got a lot of things going through my mind, and I've been trying to figure out how to even articulate it. But so I guess what I see is of the world of forms that exists without the imagination. They are not there's no illumination. There is nothing necessarily there that would give you a sense that the world is alive at all.
Exactly.
And so all you have is basically a dead world. And I think this echoes back to like why he brought up this idea that like facts are, they're just like the way of closing the gaps of our understanding through knowledge actually depresses the imagination, because what opens the imagination is gaps in our understanding. When we don't understand anything, that's what allows our imagination to flourish. When we understand things, we think we understand.
Yeah, that's what
that's what depresses our imagination. And so it's like, I guess what I'm trying to say is like, and he's almost he's basically saying that like the world that we encounter in its finitude, or in its definite form, in its concrete form, without the function of the imagination in full operation, is this dead thing,
and in the dark.
Yeah, it's in the dark. Yeah,
in the dark, like it's
you're
actually
not even seeing the world properly.
Yeah, so this might be something to keep in mind when characters in the stories are tapping around in the dark, right? I remember when Jason started reading Phantastes, and he was asking me about the shadow, and what do I think that is, and I was like, oh, I don't know, I never really thought about it. And then I remembered, or I thought, well, I'll say remember, because I think we're always remembering, but that shadows are only cast when the sun shines on a material object, right?
Yeah.
Then you have a shadow. When materialism blocks the sun, It casts a shadow. And I think that's what George MacDonald's shadows are indicating.
Which, yeah.
Yeah, there's just so much.
Isn't it great though? I mean,
Yeah.
honestly, it's
Mhm.
so great. Okay, let's do some more here. Okay, so we've done a little analysis of George. We've tested his thesis with Shelley's poem. But although the human imagination has no choice but to make use of the forms already prepared for it, its operation is the same as that of the divine, inasmuch as it does put thought into form. And if it be to man what creation is to God, we must expect to find it operative in every sphere of human activity. Such is indeed the fact, and that to a far greater extent than is commonly supposed. So he's like, pay attention. The sovereignty of the imagination, for instance, over the region of poetry will hardly, in the present day at least, be questioned. But not everyone is prepared to be told that the imagination has had nearly as much to do with the making of our language as with Macbeth or the Paradise Lost. The half of our language is the work of imagination.
Yeah.
Isn't that great?
Yeah.
For how shall two agree together what name they shall give to a thought or a feeling? How shall the one show the other that which is invisible? True, he can unveil the mind's construction in the face, that living, eternally changeful symbol which God has hung in front of the unseen spirit. That's his description of a face. Let's read that again. The face is a living, eternally changeful symbol which God has hung in front of the unseen spirit. Wow. But that without words reaches only to the expression of present feeling.
Yeah.
To attempt to employ it alone for the conveyance of the intellectual or the historical would constantly mislead, while the expression of feeling itself would be misinterpreted, especially with regard to cause and object. The dumb show would be worse than dumb. But let a man become aware of some new movement within him. Now, this is so good. Loneliness comes with it, for he would share his mind with his friend, and he cannot. He is shut up in speechlessness. Thus, and then he quotes somebody here, I don't know who, he may live a man forbid, weary 7 nights, 9 times 9. I don't know who that is. So the first moment of his perplexity may be that of his release. Gazing about him in pain, he suddenly beholds the material form of his immaterial condition. There stands his thought.
Mm-hmm.
God thought it before him and put its picture there ready for him when he wanted it. Or to express the thing more prosaically, the man cannot look around him long without perceiving some form, aspect, or movement of nature, some relation between its forms or between such and himself which resembles the state or motion within him. This he seizes as the symbol, as the garment or body of his invisible thought, presents it to his friend, and his friend understands him. Every word so employed with a new meaning is henceforth in its new character born of the spirit and not of the flesh, born of the imagination and not of the understanding, and is henceforth submitted to new laws of growth and modification.
Golly. Okay. I mean, this is so
This should be
incredibly
required reading for every single person in school ever.
Yeah.
Sorry,
It's hard though. It feels so so vastly important that I kind of want, unless he breaks it down more simplistically, I kind of want to see if we can do that.
Yeah,
Because it's just, it seems just for the simple fact of he's talking about language and the way we use language is such a important thing. I feel like it's hard to grasp, but I feel like it's important to grasp as well. So I'm trying to think of examples of what he's even talking about.
He's going to give one. He's got one coming.
Right.
He's going to give a good one. But I just love how he says, you know, so the half of our language is the work of the imagination. And then he describes two people coming together. One guy has a thought, he would like to share it with his friend, but he doesn't have a word, right?
Well,
and his face can't really convey, you know, the intellectual or the historical, right? He can't tell a story. He can't share some philosophical thought with his face. He needs a word, right?
mm-hmm.
And like, you know, because George MacDonald is just he's so playful that even this essay reads like a story, you know, like you imagine it. And then he says, gazing about him in pain, he suddenly beholds the material form of his immaterial condition, right? He's pained. He wants to tell his friend something. And he's like gazing around, looking, and he sees something in nature that already has a form. And because he said it before this, the meaning is in the form. Mm-hmm. The meaning already exists within the form, right? And so, and then he says, there stands his thought, you know, whoops, I look like a crazy professor. So, you know, there's his thought, right? It's like, oh, you know, and then he hands his thought to his friend, and his friend understands him. And, you know, we do this a lot. Like we, because we're modern, we tend to talk propositionally, right? And everyone goes, what? And then you tell a story and they go, oh yeah, okay. Right? And the story is the forms. That's what stories are. They're the forms.
But so, even like how language is formed, like in its origin, and this gets into the conversation, and I'd love to hear you speak on this, Jason, too, is you know, we start at this almost we're just making sounds to each other, you know, or even as my baby, you know, my son, he can express himself, but he's just gesturing towards whatever object or what, and he'll make a noise. And like now we have started to develop like a language that isn't the way that he'll come to speak, but the way that he's speaking now, where we can understand each other because we're friends. And so I know what he's saying, even though nobody probably else knows what he's saying besides maybe my wife, you know. And so he can, and some of it's really cute too. Like he calls boats row-rows, you know, like in every boat is a row-row. And so it's like, and it's from row your boat, you know. So it's got this meaning that's all tapped into it, but it's and it's in the form. What's so funny is it's in the form. So
in the forms.
Yeah.
I know. See, I was just remembering my daughter. She said to me one time, "Mommy, can you sing that song about the colored socks?" And I'm like, "What the?" And then I went, colored socks, and then I said, "Oh, red and yellow, black and white, they are precious in His sight." She goes, "Yeah, that one." She saw colored socks, striped socks.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah,
that's so good.
Oh, that's great.
But that the meaning was in the form, right, of a sock. Like,
yeah.
And children do this, and we think it's cute and everything, but we're actually missing out on the origin of language.
Yeah. I like you brought up too, Luke. I like the example you gave of row. And it kind of reminds me of what we were talking, because we were talking to Craig for a short bit, like right before we got on this call, and we were actually talking something similar. about the development of language, and we brought up the video we'd watched about the songs, the nonsense part of the songs and everything. But then we started talking about onomatopoeias and things like that, and I feel like Roro is kind of similar. It conveys the story of the boat, but it also is kind of an onomatopoeia in a way too. Like, how would you describe it? Like, row, row. You got this kind of. Go ahead.
Well, you're imitating nature. Like, nature is informing you. Nature is teaching you, and is the measure by which you then are creating your own representation and your own your own creation. This is poetry. It
is.
So it's now you are making, but you're making from what has been created. So it's like, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought, but
just getting back to that Merlin Sheldrake conversation, they're talking about the music of language and how language originates as music first, right? Which I think is true. I was able to see that happen with my daughter, my oldest daughter, when we got married. She was 3, and we moved to Switzerland. So it was like one minute she was in Canada speaking English and everybody understood her, and the next minute she's in another country and nobody understands her, and she can't understand anybody. And she had a really good vocabulary at a young age. So when she started learning Swiss German, and it was a very short phase, and my husband's godfather's wife was a special ed teacher, and she pointed this out to me as being really, really lucky to see it happen. She first learned the music of the language in Switzerland. Okay. So, when you hear, like if you're watching Italian television or Dutch TV or a movie in another language, you don't hear the words. You hear the music of the language. That's what you hear first. And that's what, and I know that from learning, like having to learn, I learned Swiss German, which is not a written language. So I had to just listen. And it took me a long time before I could separate out the words that I was hearing, because it just sounded like one long, word. But anyway, so she started speaking this language that sounded exactly like Swiss German, but it was total nonsense. Okay. Every word that came out of her mouth was not a Swiss word, but it sounded exactly like one. Okay. And she would be in the backyard playing, and some people would be walking by and she'd go, hello, she knew how to say that in Swiss. And then she'd run to the fence and she wanted to talk to them, and they would lean in because she'd say something to them in her Swiss, and they'd be like, and then you could see their faces going, because it was just this language that sounded exactly like it.
Yeah.
But it was only the music. And she shifted from that to being able to speak perfect Swiss German with the right vocabulary within, like, I would say 4 months. So she learned the music and she articulated it. So she had to practice, right? This lilt, to the language. And then she added her vocabulary, and then she was just off to the races. Like,
I have a question, kind of, but I don't know. If we want to get back to the text, this might derail it a little bit.
No, it's fine.
Should I ask it or wait? Okay. So in learning the music, I'm assuming you're talking about learning, like, even like almost the voices within the music is what she's hearing, and she's learning the language that way, like the syllables of people speaking musically.
The font,
the lilt of the language, like.
But I guess I was wondering too if there's utility in learning, like the instrument, like if you were to hear the music of a culture without even voices, if that would.
No, I'm not
impactful.
talking about actual music. Like, she didn't learn
Yeah.
the language by listening to Swiss folk music or anything.
Yeah,
She
yeah.
learned the music of the language itself.
That's I
Oh,
think
okay.
that's
I
why
see what
we
you're
talk
saying. I
about
see what you're saying. Okay.
Like, every language has a music. You don't hear it in English, but
Yeah. Okay. I see what you're saying.
it has a song to it, right? And
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
it has a cadence, we call it, right?
yeah. I
And
mean,
yeah.
I'm glad I
in
asked because I was
poetry,
totally off base there. Okay.
like I think that's why we use terminology like meter when we talk about poetry. Um, there's a meter, so like the head and the foot of a word, and where you put your emphasis, and then on top of that, it's like there's this innate rhythm. I mean, right there, there's this like you're saying, but that's where it originated. It's all rhythm. Like
Well,
that's where all.
yes.
Yeah. Well, I guess
Rhythm.
the reason I asked too is because where would that come from? Would that come from the gosh, I don't know where that would come from. Like, even if you're developing a language and you're taking it from these other forms around you, you would have to grab at the forms in the land you live in. So, like, if you live in Israel, that's going to be different of living in the redwoods or something. And so, even hearing the wind blow through the trees, the redwoods, or hearing the ocean, like these different sounds, would that come into the development in the music of your language?
Because I think there's an entire culture that's bound to, like, a culture emerges before the language emerges, and I might have that wrong. Maybe an anthropologist would say different, but in my understanding, there is a culture that emerges before the language, and that culture is rooted in probably the specific geography, the place in which it's
Well, I think there's no way that your language is going to develop apart from your geography. Like,
mhm.
Yeah, which
I mean,
makes me think it all
we use
gets.
geography all the time to describe inner, turmoils. Like, I'm down in a valley, or he went in a southerly direction. Things are going south. Like, we're using geography all the time to talk about this world in here, right?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And like, I'm on a mountaintop, man. I've never. I feel like I'm flying. Like, we're just like
Yeah.
we're always grasping at our own geography, I think, and I think that's one of the easiest things to point to, actually.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm getting like, I'm really like hung up on this because this is incredibly fascinating to me. I'm just wondering, like, even with,
I'm glad.
so you're walking through the fall leaves and the crunching of the fall leaves. And so that when you're trying to convey this thought you're having to your friends, you might use that crunching sound
Yes.
within a word, and then that gets incorporated into, that's like the music of the language. So the music of the language is coming almost from the land you live in, which is just incredibly fascinating to me.
Yes.
Which makes me think it's also embedded in just the instruments of the, like when I listen to Indian music, I mean, it's got those weird instruments where it sounds like kind of tangy and like it's got a whole different sound than like other, which we might be losing out a little bit now that, like, with the internet and everything's kind of, you can find all these things, but different cultures. So part of me thinks like even that is, embedded within. I don't know. This is just incredibly fascinating to me. Sorry, I'm getting totally
It's great.
distracted
I
off
love
this
it.
thing here. But
I think the more that you ruminate on this, the more you're going to understand the rest of the imagination essay, because this is what he's talking about. Like, when he says here, I keep losing it. Where is that now?
we stopped at this. He seizes as the symbol, as the garment or body of his invisible thought, presents it to his friend, and his friend understands him.
Yeah, I think that's basically what I wanted to point to. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
He seizes as the symbol, right? So the man cannot look around him long without perceiving some form, aspect, or movement of nature, like crunching leaves, right? Some relation between its forms or between such and himself which resembles the state or motion within him. I mean, we actually say something is crunchy now. It's one of those new metaphors that I haven't really grasped, so I don't know what it means. I hear people saying it, but I don't know what it is, and I'm like, okay. All I ever think about is granola.
Yeah. There you go.
So there's don't laugh at me, Jason. So there's your crunchy leaves, Jason.
Yep. There we go.
There you go.
Yeah, it's just
The-
fascinating.
The absolute isolation that we all sort of live in, even now that we have all these languages, but like I truly do think that there's like we're almost forced into the use of words that would otherwise be unnecessary if we want to live outside of ice. If we have this longing and this loneliness, and so we we must communicate. We must make an attempt to do so. But in our attempt to do so, the words are always going to fail to form. Like the and that's why they operate as symbols and these finite, like they will forever be inadequate for conveying meaning.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we still use them to convey meaning. So it's like that. It's not as if like I'm not saying that they're not useful. They're extraordinarily useful, and we use them all the time just to break out of how myopic our worlds otherwise would be. But then,
I think we often think that whatever we're saying, the person that's listening to us is totally understanding it. Right? And most of the time, unless it's really straightforward, like the bus is coming at 4:00, right? Something like that. Like in conversations like this, most of the time, nobody's really, this is the God of your own understanding, right? Like to me, this is when you're grasping onto other forms, right? And those forms, like my daughter with her colored socks, when it comes to Jesus loves the little children, right? Red and yellow, black and white. So, yeah, we see. I've got this thing about language dividing. So, the Tower of Babel is where God confuses language, right? And everybody has their own language, and then that divides them for the purpose of inhibiting them from doing something terrible. And I think that this is true. Like, just because, like I was saying earlier, we all have our own imagination, our own forms, and oftentimes when we're talking, we're missing what the other person is actually saying. Like, we're not really 100% tracking, like, ever. I don't think.
This is where it's also, Jason, I've heard you talk about this, is how like you see people as containing like just multitudes, like and how like these people are treasure troves,
Right.
of just they have all this like untapped, like if you could only just like actually tap into like what what one person has understood the world, what have you.
I've talked about this. This is one of the, to me, this is one of the positive aspects of virtual communication or relationships or whatever, because essentially this is the loneliness, right, that kicks in, and that pushes us to want to express ourselves, to articulate to somebody something else. And to me, what we're doing is we're sharing consciousness. That's what we're doing. And so I remember when I first got on the Discord, and that was like the first time I had ever used any kind of social media, right?
What a place to start.
Yeah.
I've never had Facebook or Instagram or anything ever. And I jump on this Discord server and I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like, you're talking in real time with people. And I had this image of all these heads with doors in them. And I could just like, go inside, shop around, and every head had all these shelves in it, right?
Yeah.
And on the shelves, they had little treasures, just like you were saying, Jason, treasure troves, right? So they all had these little treasures, and I could pick them up and I could look at them and go, wow, that's really great. I think I'm going to take that. And I'll leave this for later,
Yeah.
That's how I imagined. That was exactly how I imagined the Discord.
Wow. That's great. That sounds like some Alice in Wonderland stuff there.
All these heads with little doors in them.
Yeah.
And they all creak when you open them.
Moss and dust come out.
Yeah. And then I could hop out of, Luke's head and into Jason's head, right? And people are going, is this real? And I'm like, are you kidding me? This is amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is amazing.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. And it's such a, so that's what's hopeful, despite the fact that we have this isolation from
well, take it from me, a person who never used any social media, okay?
Yeah.
And who lives a little bit removed. I'm not miles and miles. Well, I am miles and miles away, but I'm not on the moon, right? And being able to do this, to share consciousness with other people, especially around things that you love.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Please don't complain.
Yeah.
That's all I have to say. Don't break the spell. To me, it's magic.
There's when you were talking, Sherry, it reminded me, and you're talking about going in and out of people's heads, and they're having all these different things, and all these different. It reminded me of that song you sent me. I'm still obsessed with the "She's a Rainbow" song.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, within this, because what Luke was referencing was actually it was from Song of Songs that I quote, and it says I was just one of those parts where I was like, I really wish I want to see every single person like this, but it says, a garden enclosed is my sister, my spouse, a spring shut up, a fountain sealed, and then it just lists off a plants of an orchard of pomegranates with all these spices, and so every person is that garden. They're all a spring that's just waiting to be tapped. They're all a rainbow, like that song, she's a rainbow, and within her is just they're all colored, basically, we're talking about this space of all these little treasures that you can walk in and out, like you're talking about, and just to see every person that way is just, gosh, it opens up your world by doing that as well.
Yeah. Well, I need them. I need you, right?
Yeah.
In order to be if you take the very beginning of this essay where he says, for repose is not the end of education. Its end is a noble unrest, an ever-renewed awaking from the dead, a ceaseless questioning of the past for the interpretation of the future, an urging on of the motions of life, which had better far be accelerated into fever then retarded into lethargy.
Yeah.
You know, and in order for me to do that, I need you.
Yeah.
I can't do that by myself.
Yeah.
I think I've failed in many times looking at other people as cans of worms that I'm not sure I want to open.
Yeah.
And because I know how much is there, you know, and yeah, you sometimes you're nervous to even want to go to the depths with
So sometimes you can sneak in, you know, unnoticed.
yeah, little
You're like,
covert operation.
especially on the Discord. And then you're like, wee.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of people that I you know, going on vacation with my family and like
Mhm.
all of a sudden like being stumped to know what to uh, say next in a conversation with a, you know, even somebody as close to me as like a family member, like a parent,
Mhm, mhm.
and being like, how am I like? And I truly, this came to mind. Like you are a wealth of just you're a fount of like knowledge and wisdom and all this other and like there's so much about you that I don't even know,
Mhm.
but like I've related to you through a certain lens my whole life, and it's like and now that feels like it's become so rigid that I don't even know how to break out of it so that
Yeah.
we can discover like all this other new stuff that we could be talking about and be excited about and like it's like ossified somehow, and now it's
Mhm.
like
And it's especially difficult with those who are closest to us, right?
yeah, gosh,
Because of all these assumptions. Like this
Yeah.
is you know, this the beginning of that Merlin Sheldrake conversation when he talked about um what was the word he used? Did he say assumptions about things? Remember when he talked about the guy in the restaurant?
oh
You know, and then the people would leave the restaurant and come back in and say, "How is everything outside so different? I don't get it."
Everything is color now.
But
Yeah.
because I was talking to Jess about it, and I said to him, you know, when you're watching a magician do his thing, right? You're like, have you ever seen you have a cat? When a cat's really curious, their whiskers just go forward, right? They're like they're looking at something, ears, eyes, everything is like, and that's what you're like when you're watching a magician. You're just everything is just like all your senses are hyper focused. Your hearing, your sight, you know, everything. And you're in the world of senses. That's where you are,
mhm.
right? And then you step out of that outside into the fresh air and you're in the world of senses and all of a sudden it's totally different because you have no assumptions. It's like another way to think about it is it's like going to a movie that you don't know anything about
Yeah.
compared to a movie that you've heard about. You know, my husband and I, we were living way up north in the bush, and we had to make this trip to Terrace to go grocery shopping, which is it's like 700 kilometers to drive. And we got all our stuff done, and we had some time. And he said, "Let's go to the movies." And I was like, "Oh yeah, let's do it." You know, because like, we're totally bushed, eh? So we went and we went to the movies, and you know, there's like 4 movies to choose from, and we're like, oh, maybe that one looks good, you know. But we didn't know anything, right? Like we had no electricity, we had no TV, no internet, nothing. And we go in, and it's The Matrix. Okay,
Oh my gosh.
we sit there, and we just like boom, and we came out of this theater. We're like, is this real? Is anything real?
Yes.
Like we were just so blown away. We were totally in the world of the senses, right? We were just like all our little whiskers were forward, you know.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah. I loved that part of that conversation. I thought that was so good.
Mhm.
Yeah. Me
Yeah.
too.
Well, maybe we should stop here.
Okay.
So we're at Thinkest Thou, says Carlyle, in past and present. There were no poets till Dan Chaucer. So if you guys can remember that, actually, I can. Can you remember? You
I mean,
probably
I'll
can.
just. Well, I have it printed out, so it's like the first
You'll
paragraph
highlight it.
on this page. So.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
Yeah.
And if anybody has insights on those, like, couple, that paragraph about figuration, I'm gonna forever be stuck on that one, probably.
Which
I still don't understand what figuration is, but we'll talk about that another time.
Okay, that paragraph of figuration is
I'm trying to figure out where that was.
right here. For what are the forms by means of which a man may reveal his thought?
Mm-hmm. For the world around him is an outward figuration of the condition of his mind, and an inexhaustible storehouse of forms whence he may choose exponents,
From
the
whence?
crystal pictures that shall protect his thought and not need to be broken, that the light may break forth.
Yes.
Unbelievable sentence. Don't know what any of it means.
Let me read it. For the world around him is an outward figuration of the condition of his mind, and an exhausted storehouse of forms, whence he may choose exponents. The crystal pictures. Oh man.
That shall protect his thought and not need to be broken. Yeah, well, okay, the crystal pictures that shall protect his thought. Like, this is where he says, remember where he says, I can't think of where it is, right? It's just above, maybe. That the meaning is in the forms.
Mm-hmm.
It's contained in the forms. So the forms are the crystal pictures that protect his thought and don't need to be broken that the light may break forth. So yeah, and the it's right after that. The meanings are in those forms already.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, they could be no garment of unveiling.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the interesting thing about the hiddenness of God in creation and the veiling and the unveiling of things, right?
Yeah.
But that's a whole other topic.
Yeah.
So.
We'll get there, all in due time.
And then he says, the man has but to light the lamp within the form. So there's a lamp within the form, right? And his imagination is the light, but it is not the form.
Mm-hmm.
So the form, could we use the form is kind of like the symbol? Could we say that?
The form,
maybe.
Whenever I see the word form, I think tree.
That's what I was thinking. I was thinking the exact same thing. I was just didn't know if I should go.
Or carrot.
Because what makes me think about a good way of lighting the lamp within the form would be what in that conversation between Merlin and that other guy, I can't remember his name.
David.
But they were David, and they were talking about like talking to things in nature. Like you could talk to the tree, and then it would probably light the lamp. And
I did that today. I actually did that today.
It's great.
Yeah.
Good.
I went out on the snowmobile, and there's a really nice spot on the property. So my snowmobile trail goes straight to the lake, but then off to the side is this little wooden bridge, and the creek runs under it, and it goes up a hill and along our fence line. But I just stopped the snowmobile, and I always walk and check the creek. And then I went back and I went to get on the snowmobile, and I looked over, and there's all these trees. Like there was fir, and there was spruce, and there was pine, and there was willow, and there was poplar. And I went like this, and I felt like they were all looking at me. And I just said, "Hey, hi guys."
So So
And
who
then
let the light in who then? Yeah.
yeah,
They were
and
already talking to you.
then I started looking at them, noticing that there was a poplar that was kind of coming up between two firs, and he was hiding, right? And I'm like, I see you, I see you.
Yeah.
And then there was a teenage pine tree, and next to it was a timid little willow who was hanging out with his buddy. Right? Like, seriously, that's what I saw. And I was just like,
that's
"Oh, you guys
great.
are so cute."
Yeah, that's really
Well,
good. But I don't
And then
think they should be a.
I said, "Thank you" to them.
Mhm.
Thank you. That's what I said.
Yeah,
that's,
I don't
I
think that
mean,
should be weird.
no, that's like me
I don't think it
apologizing.
I used to be afraid to tell people that I did those things, okay, or I thought those
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
But now I'm like, "Screw it. I'm 60, I don't care." I'm telling everybody
Good.
what I think. "Excuse me,
Yeah.
could I come in your mind? I would like to peruse your shelves and maybe steal a few things."
Yeah. Yeah.
Hello? I love it.
This is,
Well, you
I
can.
mean, this is exactly like my experience with my dog this morning, where
Yes.
just for like half a second, it's like I'm looking at her, but all of a sudden it's like I take like just it's like a half a second longer look at her, and it's like in that half a second she just becomes so much more real to me,
Mhm.
and it's almost as if, like you're
And
saying, the light comes on, and it's like you you just became real, like in this, and maybe in a way that I've never seen you before. And I
right.
immediately just like apologized to him, my dog, and
Aw.
was like, I'm sorry I haven't like seen you, you know. And,
Yeah.
and it's
And I
Wow.
can tell you from my own experience because I have this connection with animals, that I've always had,
mhm,
and when you start to see them, they notice, okay? So
mhm,
imagine if you were a slave in a Roman household and you were never seen, okay? You were just part of the furniture, right? And you were never
mhm,
seen, and then all of a sudden one day the master of the house sees you. And you know he sees you because he says something to you that only someone who really wants to know who you are would say,
mhm,
right? And then you feel what? You feel like you could speak back to him, right? Okay, so this is what animals do. They
mhm,
will not speak to you if you do not see them
mhm,
because they don't feel like they're invited to speak to you. And, my family calls me Dr. Doolittle. They're like, "Oh, yeah, she talks to animals," right? But the only reason that I can do that is because I listen. I
mhm,
see them, right? And
Hmm.
as soon as they realize that, they speak to me,
mhm.
you know?
And do you think that's something that, because like we're talking about illumination too to a certain degree, because like does your imagination ignite that inside of them? Like I'm not trying to talk like too crazy.
No.
I don't think it's crazy, and I don't know how it works either. There's this weird. Yeah, it's a weird communion, I guess, where it doesn't even. I guess I don't want to say it's telepathic. It's really strange. I don't know.
Okay, here's an example. My animals know that I listen to them. So
Mhm,
they speak to me. Okay? That's how it works. They don't speak to me because I listened to them. Animals are always trying to speak to us, and they notice very quickly that most of the time we're not listening.
mhm,
We don't see them, okay? And um so they stop doing it.
yeah.
But if you pay attention every time they speak to you, then they will keep speaking to you.
Mhm.
And sometimes they'll drive you crazy.
Yeah.
It's true.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Sometimes they'll speak to you even when you're not listening too, and you're just too dense to get it. Like I can think of times in hindsight where I'm like, man, I should have picked up on
Yeah.
that. Or even things with like synchronicities where I see these synchronicities in nature and I just didn't think anything of it. And then hindsight, I'm like, oh, maybe nature was trying to give me some hints and kept putting these
right.
things along my path. Or like you could see, like right now, I think in our boxer, I said something like, oh, there's another hawk. Like this thing's been going on with me since literally since the beginning of the year. And hawks aren't like super uncommon here, but I just don't really either I don't see them or I don't notice them. But ever since the year started, it's just been like at least once a week seems like I see one just sitting by himself on the telephone wires, and I'm just like, I don't know what this means, but it's kind of like I don't know, but in the past, like maybe that would have happened, and I would have just never thought anything of it. And I think a lot of times, and I wouldn't think anything of it until hindsight or something like that, because you're just yeah.
Well,
I think he says. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I started to say that because I listen, my animals speak to me. That's how I always put it. And so I was one of my horses had hurt his tendon, and he's massive. He's a huge workhorse. He's a purebred Percheron, and I'm sure he weighs like somewhere around 2,500 pounds. And he's 17 hands high. He's massive, huge, right? And he's just grazing around. And it was in the summertime. I was outside, and I said to my mother, I said, "Yeah, Merlin's not doing very well." His name is Merlin. I said, "Merlin's not doing very well. He's hurt his foot." And she's like, "Oh, that's too bad." And then he comes hobbling over. Okay, so he's in earshot, but we're not looking at him at all. And he comes hobbling over, and he holds his foot up like this to my mother.
Oh.
And she goes, "Oh my God, he hurt us."
Wow.
And I said, "Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
Yeah, he did."
Yeah.
Well,
Dude, yeah, you're totally right. You're totally right. And the more you open yourself up to that communication, the more they do that. Speak.
Yeah. That I've been reading the Philokalia, and there was something that I read today that I think you'll really love. And this has to do with attention. And what we're talking about has to do with attention, right?
Mhm.
So this is from Nicephorus, the Solitary. And he says this: attention is a sign of sincere repentance. Attention is the appeal of the soul to itself, hatred of the world, and assent toward God. Attention is renunciation of sin and acquisition of virtue. Attention is an undoubting certainty of the remission of sin. Attention is the beginning of contemplation, or rather, its necessary condition, for through attention, God comes close and reveals himself to the mind. Attention is serenity of the mind, or rather, its standing firmly planted and not wandering through the gift of God's mercy. Attention means cutting off thoughts. It is the abode of remembrance of God and the treasure house of the power to endure all that may come. Therefore, attention is the origin of faith, hope, and love. Since he who has no faith cannot bear all the afflictions coming from without, and he who does not suffer them willingly cannot say, "He is my refuge and my fortress." And he who has not the Almighty as his refuge cannot be truly sincere in his love for him. And then it just goes on from there. He says, this greatest of all great doings can be gained by many, or even by all, mostly by being taught. A few men receive this gift from God without being taught, working from inner compulsion and the warmth of their faith. But what is the exception is not the rule. Therefore, it is necessary to seek a teacher. And he goes on. But I just thought that was so beautiful. Attention is a sign of sincere repentance. And I, when I read that, I thought to myself, well, how is that so? But then again, when you give your attention to something, you're giving yourself up to it. Right?
Mhm.
You're sacrificing yourself to the thing that you're giving attention to.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I just thought I'd leave you guys with that because I thought it was really beautiful.
Yeah. That is really beautiful. I'm thinking of a child right now and how you give a child attention.
Yeah.
Like a newborn. A newborn kind of demands all the attention, and it for some reason I have association in my head with attention and something like gravity. Because the more you attend to something, the more it because gravity kind of holds time and space together. It kind of reshapes those, I guess. And I think I could be really wrong on this, but I've thought about this with an infant. Like when an infant's coming or when infant's here, the attention goes to the infant, and literally your world changes. Like you redo the whole house, you make a new room, you recreate everything.
Which is a kind of repentance.
Yeah, and I think that happens in repentance as well. Yeah.
It's a metanoia. This is what repentance is, metanoia, right? A turning. And that's what attention requires. It requires you, when I had little children, they would go, mommy, 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 mommy. And I was not listening unless I was looking at them in their head. In my mind, I'm like, yeah, I hear you. Right. But to them, until I go, yes, they don't stop. Right. I have to turn. I have to turn and I have to face them. And that's what metanoia means. That is repentance. That is attention.
Wow.
I never thought of it before till I read that today. And this is what George is doing. He's helping us to, he's drawing our attention to what we naturally just don't even think about. We don't realize that our language is derived from God's creation, from the forms that already exist, and the meaning is already within the forms. Like we don't even have to think of how to express ourselves. It's all there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So good. Anyway, this has been great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So much to think about. Gosh, we only read like a few paragraphs.
Yeah.
Yeah. You want to continue next time? Continue with this essay?
Yeah.
We can, yeah. I think it would be good because I don't think many people have read it either. And it's really.
I think it'll continue to unfold as we read it.
It was nice to have you along, Neutrino.
Yeah. Thanks for hanging out.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good. All right, guys, I'm going to end the broadcast. Hang on a sec. Thank you, everybody, whoever's still here with us.